The fig cake that saved a king. When God uses the ordinary. What if I told you that one of the most powerful miracles in the Bible involved a fig cake? Not a pillar of fire, not the parting of a sea, a fig cake, pressed onto a dying king's boil while he lay on what everyone thought would be his deathbed. And in that moment, in that strange, humble, almost forgettable detail, God reveals something about the way He works that will change how you see everything. This is Truth Unbroken, and today we're going back to a palace in Jerusalem, to a king named Hezekiah, and to a prophet who brought both a death sentence and a remedy that no one saw coming. Picture this: King Hezekiah, one of the greatest kings Judah ever had, is dying, not in battle, not in glory, but in bed covered in fever, his body ravaged by a boil so severe that it's killing him from the inside out. The prophet Isaiah enters the room, and he doesn't bring comfort. He brings a message from God. Set your house in order, because you are going to die. You will not recover. Can you imagine that moment? The silence after those words. The weight of them pressing down on a man who had done everything right. Hezekiah had torn down the idols, restored temple worship, trusted God when enemy armies surrounded Jerusalem. He had been faithful, and now this. Hezekiah turns his face to the wall, and he weeps, not just tears, bitter weeping, the kind that comes from the deepest part of your soul when you feel like everything you've built is crumbling. He prays. He reminds God of His faithfulness. He doesn't argue. He doesn't demand. He just pleads. And here's what moves me every single time I read this story. God hears him. Before Isaiah even leaves the palace courtyard, God stops him, turns him around, and gives him a new message. I have heard your prayer and seen your tears. I will add 15 years to your life. 15 years, a death sentence reversed. But here's where it gets interesting. Here's where the story takes a turn that most people miss. Because after God promises this miracle, after He declares that Hezekiah will live, Isaiah doesn't just walk away and wait for magic to happen. He says something that seems almost mundane. Take a fig cake and place it over the boil so that the king will get well. A fig cake. Let that sink in for a moment. God could have healed Hezekiah instantly. He could have spoken and the boil could have vanished. He'd done it before. He'd do it again. But instead, He tells Isaiah to make a poultice, a compress made from pressed figs, and apply it to the wound. Now, here's what's fascinating. In the ancient world, fig poultices were actually used medicinally. They had anti-inflammatory properties. They could draw out infection. This wasn't some random object. It was a known remedy. And that's the point. God didn't bypass medicine. He didn't bypass human action. He didn't say, just believe and it will happen. He said, take the fig cake, apply it, do your part, and I will do mine. You see, we have this tendency to separate the spiritual from the practical. We think that if God is really involved, it has to look supernatural, flashy, unexplainable. But what if the miracle isn't always in the method, but in the outcome? What if God delights in using ordinary things, figs, clay, spit mixed with dirt, 5 loaves and 2 fish, because He wants us to see that He is not limited by our categories. He's not asking us to choose between faith and action. He's inviting us to partner with Him. I think about this a lot in my own life. How many times have I prayed for a miracle but refused to take the next practical step? How many times have I wanted God to just fix it, without applying the fig cake. Maybe the fig cake for you is finally scheduling that therapy appointment. Maybe it's having the hard conversation you've been avoiding. Maybe it's getting the medical treatment you've been too afraid to pursue. Maybe it's opening the business plan, making the phone call, forgiving the person, setting the boundary. Maybe the miracle you're praying for is waiting on the other side of the obedience you've been resisting. Prayer is not meant to replace action. It is meant to inform it. We are called to trust God not only for the supernatural, but also for the simple, for the wisdom to apply the fig cake, to take the medicine, to rest when He says rest, to act when He says act. Because here's the truth this story teaches us. God's power doesn't diminish when He works through ordinary means. It's magnified. When Hezekiah's servants pressed that fig cake onto his skin, they weren't replacing faith with works. They were acting in faith. They were saying, God promised healing, and we're going to steward that promise with everything we've got. And Hezekiah, he didn't just lie there passively. He received the remedy. He let them treat the wound. He participated in his own healing. And God, faithful, sovereign, compassionate God, met him there. So what does this mean for you and me centuries later? It means we don't have to be afraid of the practical. We don't have to be ashamed when answers come through doctors, counselors, mentors, teachers, or friends. We don't have to spiritualize everything to the point where we miss the very tools God has placed in our hands. Faith isn't opposed to wisdom. Faith is wisdom applied. James 2:17 says, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. That's not discounting miracles. That's honoring the way God often delivers them, through our willing participation. Think about it. God parted the Red Sea, but Moses had to raise his staff. God brought down Jericho's walls, but the Israelites had to march. God fed 5,000, but a boy had to offer his lunch. God healed Hezekiah, but someone had to make the fig cake. When the waters of Jericho were bitter, Elisha threw in salt. When a widow was starving, Elisha asked what she had. Just a jar of oil. When Jesus healed a blind man, He used mud made from spit and dirt. And when the king of Judah lay dying, He used a fig cake. Do you see the pattern? God invites us into the process, not because He needs us, but because He's forming us. He's teaching us to trust Him and to act, to pray and to move, to believe for the supernatural while we steward the natural. And here's the other thing this story does. It dignifies the small things. A fig cake. It's so easy to overlook. It doesn't sound like much. It doesn't look impressive. But in God's hands, it became part of a miracle that extended a king's life by 15 years. Your fig cake might feel small today. It might feel ordinary, insignificant, not spiritual enough, but don't despise it, because God has a way of taking the mundane and making it miraculous, not by changing its nature, but by blessing its use. The prayer you pray while you take the medicine, the faith you hold while you go to therapy, the trust you exercise while you do the work, the hope you carry while you wait, that's not weak faith. That's whole faith. Faith that believes God is big enough to work through anything, even a fig cake. Hezekiah lived 15 more years after that moment. 15 years to lead his people, to worship, to write psalms, to see his son born, to experience life he thought was over. All because God heard his prayer and sent a prophet with a promise and a poultice. Both mattered. The divine word and the human action. The supernatural promise and the natural remedy. not either or, both and. That's how God works. Not to confuse us, but to include us. Not to diminish His power, but to display His creativity. Not to make us dependent on methods, but to free us from false categories that say He can only work one way. So maybe today you're like Hezekiah, lying in bed, facing something that feels terminal, and you're weeping, wondering if God even sees you. He does. He hears your prayers. He sees your tears, and He is not finished with your story. But maybe, just maybe, He's also handing you a fig cake, something practical, something you can do, something that requires your partnership. Don't despise it. Press it on, act in faith, take the next step, and watch what God does when you meet Him in the ordinary. Because the God who heals kings with fig cakes is the same God who still uses the simple, the humble, and the overlooked to accomplish the impossible. And that is Truth Unbroken.